You'll need last week and this week's handout, so if you, hopefully, Dorothy. So if you don't have last week's, grab that. It's labeled 316FF or 0908. So we'll start there and then we'll go to this week. Yeah, if you left it at home, there's plenty of copies. Just grab another one.
So Vicki, do you have 8 people for your table?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was going to say that you have a full table.
The more the merrier.
Yeah.
Right? I asked Pastor and Ann. I hope we get done.
Yeah.
Might have to fight for them.
Eric, I know.
Yeah.
I know. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Everybody has their handout?
Requested early.
Yeah.
You have coffee, you have handouts, you have Bibles, you are good to go. And you have bagels, some of you. All right, so let's start. Begin in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
All right, welcome, Matt. Or not Matt, this is Mike. Mike, Matt, Mike, M. You got it. We started to talk about chapter 4, verse 4, but we should go back a little bit just to get context. And you might... I told you last week that starting in end of chapter 3, Dorothy.
Happy anniversary.
Oh, we got another anniversary.
Anniversary too?
Today.
Today? Happy anniversary.
Yeah,
There's flowers on the altar for you.
there you go. It's that...
It was ours on Wednesday. We can share.
Yeah.
Early summer, late summer, lots of anniversaries, right? 23. All right, back to what we were talking about. Thanks. Focus. Squirrel. End of chapter 3, moving forward all the way really through chapter 10 or so. It sometimes is hard to see a consistent theme running from verse to verse, usually maybe in little blocks. This is similar to what we see in Proverbs, but the blocks tend to be a little bit longer, so more verses. And so you don't necessarily have continuous themes. I suggested to you last week that maybe similar to what we see in Proverbs is that there's scribes, there's people writing down what Solomon's saying, and then it's compiled perhaps later, or maybe even during his lifetime, and then he signs off at it. And I gave you the example of Luther. So that means that sometimes those people who are compiling it together, even guided by the Spirit, don't necessarily think of it in terms of like we have to have this grand arcing narrative story, because it's wisdom literature. And it's meant to be, I would suggest, a little bit more bite-sized that way, so that we can continue it consider it in sections. It might be a little bit challenging to understand then why 4 through 6, where it comes from and where it's going. So last week we talked beginning of chapter 4 about the oppression, and we understand oppressed, the being the oppressed, and that's usually under the weight of somebody with power. And that power sometimes is from authority, sometimes not. We have to be a little bit careful with this section. We didn't talk about it last week. But this if you like, idea of power and oppression is the framework that guides all of the Marxist, neo-Marxist agendas that are being perpetuated in society. So there are the victims and the oppressors. That's how it's usually framed. And they say that that's the way to understand, that's what Marx said, well, also Engels suggested that's the way to understand the history of the world, is that there's the oppressed and there's the oppressors. And then the whole history of the world is this dynamic of the oppressed overthrowing the oppressors and then becoming the oppressors and then having oppressed and then those overthrow the oppressed. And there's a way that that's probably true historically, right? We see revolution after revolution. There's a cyclical nature. But they were running with a philosopher, Georg Hegel, who was a German philosopher, who was the philosopher of the 19th century. Like, bar none, everybody studied with Hegel, or they studied with a Hegel student. So, and Marx is no different than that, so is Engels. And so they, what Hegel suggested is something called the dialectic. Have you heard of this? The dialectic, yeah. So that it's usually framed with this kind of language today. I think it was even in that day. Is that there's the thesis, and then there's the antithesis or antithesis. Good so far? And then through revolution, usually, then there's the synthesis, and the two things are put together. And now that becomes the thesis, and then an antithesis comes that questions the thesis, and then the best of both gets synthesized into a new thesis. And this is the myth of human progress, is that the theses just get more and more, if you like, better, accurate, something, and we get closer and closer to what is the ideal, the perfect.
Is that problem, reaction, solution? Is
Yeah,
that the
same thing, same framework, yeah. Yeah, and that it's also true. This is the problem. But is that the only way to understand society or history? Well, what's missing from it, first and foremost? God, yes, correct. All right, there's no hand of God at work in history. There's no dynamic there. There's also another problematic idea, contrary to God's word, is that the human race can perfect itself apart from God again, right? But then it discounts or even disputes the idea of sin. So it'll often just reframe sin as good. That's one way to do it. But also, at the core is that man is inherently wanting what's best, right? So this is the survival of the fittest. Darwin is also a student of Hegel. So it affects a lot of aspects of society. And this is all what, especially if you went to public school, this is what you were taught to believe and to think of the world. So this will explain to you why, like in a political season, why you have now open embrace of extremes, right? Or even if it's framed that way, it doesn't matter if it's actually true, because I don't think so. I think actually it's center and left, but there's no right-wing people running for office. Okay, whatever right-wing means, that's like two wings of a demon bird anyway. But yeah, it's hollow words. But anyway, it's painted as extremes, and then what we want is the unity party, right? To bring the two extremes together, and then here we have consensus, right? It's Hegelian dialectic. It's this old philosophy that I mean, I suppose in human sense it makes sense. It would work, except there's no promise that the synthesis is actually going to be better than either of the extremes, right? So like we don't want to synthesize like conservative values and progressive Marxist ideas. The synthesis of that is actually just progressive Marxist ideas. It's not actually.
Isn't it really trying to put evil and good together to kind of make something different instead of keeping them separate?
So that you neither call evil evil or good good. You don't even know you can't even distinguish. Because we had to deal with death in the sermon today. And I'm going to mention a lot of ways that we think about, or that we let death be actually the story that we tell. Everything's about dying and death, and that's not helpful either. This is always the problem. Oppressed and oppressor is a framework to understand what we see, but it isn't the only dynamic, all right? And of course, it lacks, and we talked about this last week, what's missing? The comforter, right? There's no comforter. There's no comforter. So actually, Solomon is actually a great response to this whole oppressed-oppressor dynamic that people talk about. Leah, is what's missing? You said God, even more specific, there is no comforter. There's no one to comfort in distress. And rather than just saying, well, we should just embrace whatever's evil or whatever because that's just the way things are these days, this is the other option of this. It's like, well, there's oppressed and there's oppressors, and Solomon probably is an oppressor as a king. And then, therefore, I praise the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive, because they don't have to keep going through this. They get the escape. So there's an embrace of death as kind of a good idea, which Jesus doesn't call death good. So, but again, under the sun or under heaven, people embrace death, actually, right? He does here. It'd be better than both is he who has never existed. So better than the oppressed or the oppressor is the one who never existed, who's not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So, like I said, Hegel, Engel, Marx, whoever you want to pick, who wants to define reality as oppressed and oppressor, they're not wrong, but they're lacking any kind of any kind of God, except for themselves, or of humanity, or whatever, however they want to define it. Or even death. Death is a god to them.
So without other equals, basically it is still at all.
Right. It's evil upon evil, compounding evil, synthesizing with more evil, until the only thing left is actually the end of this earth, right? So the idea that the myth of human progress, it's hard, because from our perspective below, it does seem like some things are getting better. I mean, like poverty. You can get flown in from Haiti and make $30,000 a year, free, just in your pocket. I mean, well, okay, never mind about that. But you understand, like, whereas everybody else making minimum $16.50 an hour or something, right? I mean, that's basically like starting wage these days, that sounds pretty good too. I mean, when I started working, what was it, $4.25 or something?
Probably 90 cents an hour.
All right, now you're dating yourself. You can thank inflation for that, not wage growth. All right, so I don't know if I covered that last week, so I want to make sure we hit that before we move too far on. But we really do change subject then with 4, which 4 through 6 is what we should do. Yeah, because it ends with toil and grasping for the wind. So let's just do 4 through 6, and we'll talk about it.
Again, I saw that for all toil and every skillful work, a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full, together with toil and grasping for the wind.
Okay, so we're talking about work, right? And there's a couple aspects here. All toil and every skillful work, a man is envied by his neighbor. So we also have envy. Which commandment has to do with envy? Children. We haven't gotten to it yet. Which commandments have to do with envy? There's your hint. Commandments. Where does envy start? Where does it? What sense is where envy usually starts? With the eyes. Yeah, with the eyes. So you see. All right, so which commandments have to do with the eyes? Coveting. Yeah, coveting. Envy and coveting are roughly synonymous. Right, so you covet your neighbor, you desire what they have, and in this case, you desire the toil and skillful work they have. Right? Everybody's susceptible to this. No, there's somebody behind me. Even pastors, right? Is that you envy your fellow pastor's congregation or the character of the congregation, things that are going on, the kind of people that are involved, the kind of maybe wealth that's available. I mean, the size, all of that. So you envy that, and you don't realize, like I have appreciated as a small congregation that things are actually relatively, I don't want to say easy, but there's just not as much, right? So you can imagine, we know that once you hit about 200 maybe, after that, it's probably time to start thinking about 2 pastors, because it's just unmanageable. But there are pastors who have thriving congregations, and they're sole pastors, and there's 400 people, and they're worn pretty thin, right? So do you really want to envy them? Well, this is what we do. And Solomon, even as a king, I'm sure there's people who envied all of his wealth and land and wives and whatever, all that they had. But envying another man's work and his toil, he says, is vanity and grasping for the wind. Because what does that envy get you? Does it even motivate? I mean, you're coveting. Does it actually motivate you to do anything? To work like they do? Not usually. So maybe. Maybe you're motivated by the... usually it's inaccessible. The people we envy would be something like, I don't know, maybe you're into martial arts and you watch the UFC fight. You're like, for me to get from here to the UFC, octagon, well, one, not at 46. Okay. It's not going to happen. I would have had to been training from probably Luke's younger than Luke. Right? Yeah. And plus, 40. It's the same thing with pick your sport, right? It's like maybe quarterback you can play into your 40s. Probably not, because you can't move your neck anymore because you've had all the bones fused together. That was Peyton Manning. Remember, he had to turn his whole body to be able to see. Right? I mean, there's a point where you can't even attain to that. So what would be the point of envying that? Because you're usually on the other side. Now maybe as a American Idol kind of thing, you're a young person and you envy the person and you want to get there. Maybe you could do that. But you still need talent. Sometimes the same thing with entrepreneurial stuff, right? Which is also captive to envy. Most people are not successful in starting a business because just not right place, right time, right? It's not even, they may have all the skill set, they may have the drive and the ambition. It's just not the right time. It's either not yet or it's too late, right? You're going to say something?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can see the vanity of the grasping of the wind is, again, the big thing with Solomon when it comes to wealth and work, anything that has to do with, that he calls vanity, just life in general, is he's an old man, I would suggest. He's trying to teach us to be content. And we're not content, right? Especially if we're younger. Older folks have to be content because you just can't do very much, right? And you can't even really, like you can't change the last 63 years of marriage. 63? 64? 64, right. Right. No, you can't change any of that. You can be thankful for what you have. You can certainly commit to doing better moving forward, of course, and it's never too late. You can always do better. But even that is like, what are you chasing after? Grasping for the wind. Yeah, because you don't know what better even is. What would that actually look like? At this point? No, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change.
It's easier to walk or to move,
Right. But where's that going to come from? Maybe. I mean, it takes a lot more work to be able to like rehab or whatever. Or maybe get more bionic parts. You need some more metal parts. Yeah, right, exactly.
Pastor,
Yeah.
I find that a struggle, like, you know how Paul talks about contentment so much?
Yeah.
I find that a struggle in like, is it okay to want like something more and strive for that?
Right.
Like if you're just content, like then you never move forward either. You know what I mean? I struggle with that. Like,
Were you here last week?
no.
Okay.
Were we here? No.
You were camping last week. Yeah. I don't know if I think you missed the one Sunday you would have gotten this. No, it's worth repeating frequently. But what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, we heard last Sunday, is seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. So to aspire for that, to aspire to receive Jesus, to be in his word. And he says everything else will be added to you. So the recipe for contentment is actually to point your desires, your aspirations, is to be faithful. And then let that faithfulness, the Holy Spirit will work faithfulness out in your life. And he says, don't worry about the other stuff. The things that we spend most of our time aspiring for, he says, don't worry about. I'm going to give you that anyway. And you're like, well, how's that going to work? Like I should look for the new job or the big project or something. He's like, yeah, that'll come. Don't worry about that. It's like, I mean, and everybody falls victim to this. I've tried to actually model this just out of necessity with the coffee business. Like I don't actually spend any time on marketing. I just roast coffee and I give it to people and I hope they enjoy it and then that they share it. It does tend to stall out at some point, but I would just say that's the Lord's doing, right? It's weird, but I don't rely upon that for my primary income by any stretch. So I can just kind of treat it that way as just like I'm going to focus on being, husband, father, pastor, and let the coffee thing just do its own thing. And let's see what God gives there. And maybe he gives it growth and I need to actually have, hire people to take it over. I mean, that's all possible, but I don't actively try to do that. Now that's weird. Most people can't live that way. You spend most of your time, I quoted in the sermon last week, I quoted the hymn, right? We spend our time in fretting with getting, that's the rhyme. I don't remember all the words in between. Was that, what is the world to me? Probably. It's probably that hymn. We sang that for the opening hymn last week, I think. Maybe. So it is a struggle. It isn't to mean that you don't work hard. So laziness we're going to talk about here in a minute. So don't worry, he's going to get to that. But Jesus is very clear, especially, is that isn't our first priority in life. You know, and that's not even our first priority in any of the vocations he gives us. So in our home, the first priority is that we are in God's word and our children receive that. That's the first priority. Not that they get a good job or they get their driver's license. Thanks, Luke. Finally, yeah, it saves me a lot of effort on Sunday morning. Anyway, I mean, that's good, but it's of secondary importance. It's not that it's not unimportant. Maybe that's the right way to think about it too. It's not that your work is unimportant, but it's of secondary importance. Right? So, I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah. Yeah, the fact that he says it's going to follow anyway, so just don't worry about it. We're all aspiring to live by that, and it's a struggle year after year. That's why we hear it every year. It's one of our readings, yeah. All right, so what else do we read? The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. That's a weird expression, isn't it? Yeah. What's going on there? Folding his own hands, consuming his own flesh. All right, think about hands and folded. What can't happen if your hands are folded? Can't use them, but here in this context, what can he do? If you have your hands unfolded, what happens? It's a picture of things being able to leave. Right? So a fool lives unto himself. This is what it's talking about. It ends up being consumed by himself, by his stuff. Jesus has a parable about this. You remember? I got so much stuff. I don't know what to do with it. Oh, I know. I'll just build bigger barns, more barns, and put more stuff in that. The hoarder, right? Yeah. And it's like, but you have all these people around you that could benefit from all the things that I've given you. This is what God's saying. It's like, and you're just going to build more barns and hold it all to yourself, and it ends up eating you. It ends up consuming you. You get consumed by the wealth that you have, right? And it just, it takes over your mind. So that's what happens to the fool. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. So better to have an abundance, or better to have a little in the hand, but be content with that than to have much and trying to hold it all in, because it takes work to hold it all in, to protect your wealth. I don't know, I follow all these YouTube channels that are telling, here's your inflation hedge, here's how to protect your wealth. And like, yeah, okay, that's until they come to your house with guns, okay, or whatever, or delete the internet or something, I don't even know.
You always hear those stories about people who like make it big, but they say our happiest time was when we were in that little apartment and we had no money.
Yep.
Kind of that whole thing.
Yeah, and I think, some of us, I know I have these thoughts periodically. It's like, well, when everybody's moved up except for Naomi, and we can, just get the RV and just sell everything and just go camping around, just park it in the driveway of the children's homes, and just, yeah, exactly. And hopefully they have a ditch or something we can empty the. I was going to call it what they call it in Christmas Vacation, but that's the scene, right? By the side of the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. Cousin Eddie. Yeah. What a scene.
If you just buy a park sticker, you can go there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just buy a park sticker and then you can go dump at the. Yeah. Okay. What are they, gray water? Isn't that what they call it? Yeah. The gray. And black water. Gray water, black water. There's both. Right, but you can see you can see why people do that. Why they just buy the RV and they go park and maybe they move to the south in the winter and they just sell the house and just a simple life, right? There's the problem with the simple life, though. This is always there's this push-pull or tension or balance, because the simple life can be lived in isolation, and it can be lived selfishly, right? You're like, it's simple, and yet, where's your neighbor? Where's your church? Where's your family? Maybe even, right? So. Yeah, well, there is that. You could do that. Who would? Oh, they don't exist anymore, but they used to. I think you used them here once for something. Maybe for this was the workers from Texas or wherever come up with the RV.
The 72.
Yeah, was that is that who you used? Yeah, I'm thinking of another group.
Oh, that,
And workers, something?
Yeah.
No.
yeah, they,
Laborers for Christ.
That's it. Laborers for Christ. I don't think the organization exists anymore.
I
But
haven't heard
that's what they
anything
used to do.
about them lately.
So they were all like craftsmen, right? And they would park there and they'd live on the property and
They actually built St. Andrews down towards West End.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there you go. Right. So at least their hands are put to work. They're helping their neighbor, even though they're living this kind of nomadic life, just going from place to place, putting those skills to use. So that's not vanity and grasping for the wind. They're actually living for others, and they get to integrate it into that congregation for a time too, right? Become part of that group, right? But this is just basic. We see this all over the Scripture, all the stuff about money and wealth, right? And it's just the way that it can consume you if you're trying to hold on to it all the time. And better, Luther describes it this way. You probably heard it from me. Is keep your fingers separate so that things can fall through. Right? Think about the Levitical mandate of that you see in the story of Ruth and Boaz, right? Where Boaz actually instructs the gleaners to leave a little extra than usual. But usually, like when you're gleaning, there's a lot of grain, and they were supposed to leave the edges, not to try to glean on the edges, so that the poor could glean there. So it was actually instructed by God to provide for the poor that way, is to just not gather everything up. And then Boaz says, and she ends up with like a whole bushel or something. She ends up or many bushels, I think, like a lot, because they're being very generous for her, which is a part of that whole courtship in that story, which is so cool. Why did I bring up gleaning? Oh yeah, because of the hands, right? Just let some fall to the ground. It's fine. Even for the ox, right? So that while he's treading out the grain, otherwise, what's he going to eat, right? So you can imagine the ox would like that job, to be able to kind of nibble as he's walking along and pulling the plow. All right. So that's pretty straightforward, right? What did I write on the sheet, though? I gave you all sorts of stuff. I think we talked about some of this. So we have a few independent statements about human occupations. It may seem out of place with what precedes and what follows, but the conflict deliberately conveys the message. Work is a gift of God and a needed blessing for oneself, family, and neighbors, but as with any other temporal blessing, temporary, the believer should not make this one good thing in life the only or whole thing in life by becoming, say, a workaholic. When work is wrongly motivated, it becomes all-consuming, measuring worth by work and quotas, wealth and stockpiles, inheritance, and those who lay claim to it, right? And this is below. This is how we do things. Like, who's the world's richest man, right? Who are the top 10? Who are the 1%? It's like, well, who cares? It's not even, it's like, why are you measuring yourself against others that way? But this is what we do, right? So Elon Musk, of course, is probably the wealthiest. And then some Saudi guy is in there, probably. But some Belgian guy is number 2, I think. I don't know. You don't even need to know who these people are, right? What? You're not in the top 10? Top 1? You live in Belgium. Okay, well. I see what you mean. That's funny. So New Testament has some of this. We'll get to it. Believers who operate with God's values work hard to, what do we call that? Protestant work ethic? Right? Even though by God's grace, believers already have all the treasure they need for blissful eternity. So we talked about that last week in church. The raging fire of envy is quelled into quietness. Envy quelled into quietness. The vicious competition born of jealousy is turned into cooperation bred by compassion for fellow sinners. All right? So a Christian employer might be a bit different than a non-Christian, and that, like, your goal might actually be to be able to hire people and provide them a living wage so that they too, like you, can raise a family, and we have a different motivation, a different kind of compassion. Although I had a Jewish employer who was very much like that. He was still cutthroat, but at the same time he wanted to make sure my family was cared for as best we could. So I think that's still true for others. The children of God work hard in joyful gratitude because Christ is their vicarious satisfaction. We're satisfied in Christ. Warnings against laziness are prominent in biblical wisdom. So there you go. Proverbs 6, 24, 26, 31. Then in the New Testament, 1 Timothy 5. Did we already have this? No, this will be probably tomorrow in our daily prayer. 2 Thessalonians 3. We could look at that one, since we'll hear 1 Timothy in daily prayer. 2 Thessalonians 3, 6. We command you, brethren, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the tradition which you received from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow us, for we were not disorderly among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. And this is Paul talking as a missionary, right? Church planner. He made his tents, that whole thing. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Yeah, that's not the welfare state, is it? For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. Many things to say, not many things to do. Now those who are such we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ that they work in quietness and eat their own bread. But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. And if anyone does not obey our word in this epistle, note that person, and do not keep company with him, that he may be ashamed. Yet do not count him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. Right? So part of what was happening in the church in Thessalonica is that the church had, a food distribution. Right? Many churches still do. We kind of do. It's the food bank. But that's not for you to not work. Right? You don't, what do you call it? Relying on handouts, I think it is, or on other people's charity. Charity is there for you in time of need. Right? Now, it's true, if you're disabled or other things, there may be cause that you have to rely upon others for that. But if you're able to work, then you work. Right? And the goal is always to provide for yourself first. And then in that, God will actually provide for you opportunity for others who maybe are in a situation like you are. So you'll see that, the rags to riches story, then they end up being very charitable because they used to be like that. Sometimes, right? And then we're actually instructed to be like that. And so the golden mean of biblical wisdom is portrayed in this verse. You'll see the same thing in Proverbs 15. On the one hand, the worker does not burn himself out trying to best his neighbor, okay, with envy, nor does he, in the literal imagery of this verse, keep both hands full by toiling at too many enterprises. On the other hand, he does not slack off to the point of starvation or failure to support his family. So to be sure, he works hard as he should, but he also knows when to lay his work aside and to enjoy with tranquility and contentment the simple gifts God has given to him and his household. So, the golden mean, it's this, I call it like a tension or a push-pull or balance. None of those are quite adequate. But on the one hand, we work. On the other hand, we know we have to stop working sometimes, right? And because we have vocational priorities that are in the place. So I think, this last paragraph is probably very important. In this modern age, many people have a way of allowing work to become their whole life, as both husband and wife make themselves ragged, run themselves ragged even. Inevitably, the time comes arriving far too late when they are forced to ask themselves, why didn't I spend more time with my kids or on my marriage? Have you ever heard that from anybody? Yeah. Other people today, and it's not, like I said, it's never too late to say, okay, we're going to turn a page, we're going to do differently now. And you can regret how you neglected for however long it was, but that's the place for confession and absolution, because you can't change what happened, as you said, right, Eileen? But that doesn't mean you can't say, well, let's do something better or different now, right? Other people today, and this problem seems to only get increasingly worse, center their lives around playtime. I have something to say about this, but anyway. One can only marvel at the utter gravity with which fun is undertaken. Recreation has become big, serious business, like traveling or whatever, right? And for entrepreneurs who feed off of them. So I was hearing a story yesterday about a timeshare. Anybody ever get caught up in a timeshare? Yeah. You can see the motivation. Almost. Yep. For the child of God, nothing in this world is his whole life. When he asks himself honestly, what things do I really need? His list turns out to be incredibly short. Christ lives within, and his whole life is by faith in the Son of God. In him, all life is permeated with true and lasting quietness. So contentment or quietness, they're kind of synonymous in that way. So this idea about being fun, this is what's motivating at least one of the candidates running for president. Let's not be too serious. That's why you have to laugh all the time at everything. Because we're just life is too short. Just have fun. Let's have fun. Let's do hand motions. Okay, I'm going to teach you these hand motions. Like, what? Why? And also I'm going to treat you like children. Like I don't know if you ever watched any of these rallies. They're excruciating, but if they're you'll understand if actually my mother-in-law Alice is here. Is they operate according to what is today the primary pedagogy for early childhood, which is what is it? What are early childhood teachers taught is like the primary thing that needs to happen in the classroom? Fun. We have to have fun, right? And so you have to have fun songs. You have to have fun coloring. You have to have fun. You have to gamify everything. Everything has to be a game so that it's fun, right? And then I'm come along on this weird old guy that is like, let's actually do some work. And you see that dynamic. So you have at least one candidate who's like, we have hard work to do to try to get ourselves out of this hole that we've dug, right? And then you have the other candidate that said, let's just have fun, because life's too short to really all hung up about policies and things. And so let's just laugh and let's make hand motions and have chants and then act like whatever. Policy doesn't even matter. There's no work to be done. And this is. And I feel like I'm in a pre-K classroom, and I'm the child, and it's demeaning, it's infantilizing, right? Infantilizing, and people like it. They want that. They like what do they call it? The good vibes.
They like being talked down to.
They liked being talked down to, as long as you're smiling, and yeah, it is weird, but it's weirdly successful. No, because the people you're talking to are children.
They've been trained for that from preschool.
Right, exactly. It always has to be fun.
Promise to give them things.
What? And you promise to give them things like a child, right? And, I'm like the fairy godmother, right?
Well, here's what, and I were talking yesterday, I said, I don't understand this with men. The men now, we're, for me, and I hope everybody now sees what COVID actually was, because I could not believe the men that didn't stand up. And as a woman, that still to me just baffles me. And there was very few men in my life that I know that stood, Matt was one, but that stood against it and said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm not participating in any of this. I see exactly what you're doing. No, thank you.
Right.
But so many men didn't, and they cowered to it. And to me, that was, like I said, as a woman, that still bothers me so much.
Yeah.
So even like what you're talking about, why aren't the men standing up and saying, no, this isn't okay?
What do you think? I have my idea.
I don't know.
I'll let you answer. What? Mike has a book, Encourage the Men to Come to Men's Ministry, and there's many potential answers there. I know, it's hard, you don't want to talk about this, but...
Why don't you want to, we should talk about it.
Between the estrogen everywhere.
Okay, so there's actually a biological reason,
Sure.
right? You have phytoestrogens, you have plastics that are estrogen
And they've been beaten
producing.
on TV.
Mm-hmm.
So many aspects.
Yeah. Those toxic men, right? Toxic masculinity. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Men are under attack, basically.
Men are under attack.
And masculinity, all that is under attack.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether you're male and female. It's fairly easy to like being coddled, to have basically a mother hen, that provides you with your things and doesn't require you to actually struggle and work hard and take responsibility and have authority, because they'll take all of that from you and provide for you, and you just have to do the things, right? We'll keep you safe. Well, don't worry about it. You don't have to.
But that's the trap.
Even
Yeah.
Even in families, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of times, everything's given to them because your college is.
Yeah. So I mean, we have I would say the masculine virtues, as they're confessed in Scripture, are born out of struggle and necessity, and the demands of a tribal kind of society, where, like, the expectation where, no, you're going to leave the house and you're going to marry and you're going to, and you're going to work hard for your family. Yeah. And it works the other way too. Unfortunately, we all have experience with this, where you'll marry your daughter off to somebody who can't provide, and then because they're in this same kind of milieu, this kind of soup that where it's like, well, no, like there's no requirement for me to actually get a job and work. I struggled with this because I had, coming out of college, I was graduating. Ethan was due in November. I think he was due in November. He came in November anyway. And so I graduated in May of the same year. So, when you graduate, then it's time to get a job. And I have a wife and a child on the way, right? So definitely going to have to get a job because she's not going to be able to work. And so I had opportunities, and my plan or my goal was to actually work in media. But everything, you start as an intern, unpaid intern. So you have to be able to provide for yourself by other means, a spouse or parents or something like that, which, never mind that industry. I don't know how that actually works. But that's how, most of it is, your parents are like, oh, cool, you want to be a musician? Here, we'll take care of you for a while, right? And so I was like, I can't be an unpaid intern. And then one company offered me a half-time job. So it was kind of a half internship, half paid. That was Big Idea Productions. Anybody remember Big Idea? VeggieTales. Yeah. Which they went bankrupt about a year later. So I was happy to not have taken that opportunity. Even a Lutheran school had offered me a position, but it was starting pay of $20,000, something like that. No benefits. I was like, no, because it's not charity. I have a wife, so I had to pursue something where I could provide for them. And I thank my parents for that. It's like, no, I'm not going to go bum off the state or do something. No, you're going to get a job and, strike out and do what you have to do. Because we wanted to continue having children, of course, too. So, so I don't know. I mean, that's a generation ago now. My children have been doing this, I guess, in one way or another. So I think it can be modeled and then emulated. You don't even have to be all that intentional about it. It's just like I was taught the value of hard work. And apparently my children believe that too, right? They want jobs to do things and make some money, learn how the world works that way. And but also, I think it's that dependency model is probably what's at the core there. Dependent upon parents or like,
Right. I mean,
yeah.
if they have if there's no expectations, they won't give up much.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't kicked Luke out, but he's, at some point, Ann keeps saying he's going to pay rent if he stays in the house, so.
I think you're right, maybe it has to be modeled more, maybe it hasn't been modeled for a generation or two, a lot.
Yeah, my parents did not pay for my college. I haven't paid for my, that's not exactly true. I am generous, but not, I'm a benevolent God, right? To quote a movie. Which is always like, I have paid for some college, but generally not, so. That's your responsibility. And what I have paid, I'm told I'm going to get repaid for, but I don't expect that. So, because you don't give with expectation of return, right? You just make it happen. So, but that dependency model, and the state promotes that. We have a dependency. We're seeing this with the immigration, right? That's the scandalous part about it. It's just one thing to immigrate, but like the whole model that we learned, we read the books, right? About like they come and they're poor and they're working hard and they're scraping together and they band together. The Irish are staying with the Irish, the Germans with the Germans. We help each other out. We're all trying to pick each other up, and make a go of it. The frontier mentality, right? That was always glorified, and that wasn't an easy life by any stretch. You have basically nothing, and you're just gonna try to live off the land, as they said, right? That's not what we have today. Like it's actually probably better to come as an illegal than it is to come as a legal immigrant. And that shows you inversion of values, and it's creating this dependency so that everybody is, whether they like it or not, it ends up being servant to the state. And then it's just idiocracy, and like drink your electrolytes and we'll have fireworks and you can celebrate your slavery. So, yeah. Men don't tolerate slavery, so you have to kind of make them slaves so that they don't fight against it. There's more that can be said. Read the book. Come to the men's ministry if you're. Have your man come. Have your man come. All right, let's keep going. All right, so verse 7. We're just going to read 7 to 12. All right, so I'll scroll for you.
Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune.
Grave misfortune, evil task. Okay?
Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. And the threefold cord is not quickly broken.
All right. Anybody heard this for a text at a wedding? You have? Okay.
Kevin, they had a board made up with the rope on it.
So they used it with the threefold? Yeah, and so what was the idea behind the threefold cord? Because there's as many interpretations as this under the sun.
It's that God is with you in your marriage.
Yeah, I think that's not found in the early Christians. It's not found in the Jewish writings either, but it is found more recently. So it's been a kind of a more recent interpretation. I think it's valid, certainly, right? We would say Christ at the center is another way to say that, right? A threefold cord, though, that's just a basic illustration. Like a rope that just has two is easily broken, but you usually have at least three, right? You even see this in cables, Ethernet cables. It's a twisted pair, but there's actually four, and then there's a fifth. So for the strength of integrity of the whole thing, you have to twist the pairs together. But twisting the pairs together actually gives it integrity, and also RF resistance, but you don't need to understand the science of that. With common mode noise rejection, everybody understand common mode noise? Okay, never mind. Pastor does know about some things that aren't really useful for ministry. The reason why we read the whole thing is it's pretty straightforward. It starts with 1, goes to 2, and then it ends with 3. 1, 2, 3, right? So I think they do belong that way. There's kind of a step up. So it first begins with loneliness, right? Without companion. Somebody's alone. And so here's the vanity of work when you're alone. What's the point? Right? There's no end to all the labors. There's no eye satisfied with riches. He never asks. That's implied, but I like the idea that he does ask. Whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? Why am I doing all of this? What's the point of my work if I'm alone? And the answer is, well, okay, so you feed yourself, but what's the point of being alone? Is there a point? Now, see, in our society today, we're taught to live alone. You're supposed to have, what do you say? Self-esteem, right? And autonomy. That's the big word, isn't it? Autonomy? What's the other word? Right? Individuality, individualized education. We talk about that. It's between me and God. Even in the church, people talk that way. Is that true? Is there any faith that's just between you and God? It's not even possible. It's a corporate faith. God of our fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? They're at least with you. Never mind those who share the faith with you, right? Are with you, right? Never mind, you're never alone, but it's always 2 or 3 are gathered, right? It's always community. That began with creation in the beginning, right? He created them, male and female. He created them, right? He said, and then expanding in Genesis 2, right? It's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for God to be alone. That's why he creates man, you see? So this idea of that, like the loner, the hermit, the desert mystic. I know my friend Pastor Riley likes the desert mystics, but I like what they write, but they don't even go alone, you know? It's the weird, what was the guy that lived on the pole? That was a philosopher. He wasn't a Christian. Do you know about this? He lived his whole life on a top of a pole. And he just, they'd run stuff up to him and drop stuff, and he was trying to plumb the depths of the universe by being isolated. No, that's no good. Right? So this is another basic problem of the vanity of life. And he gives us a new perspective. I say it this way, maybe to summarize. You may think that life in this harsh world is horrendous enough, but it can get even worse. Think of facing all of life's sorrows alone. All right? So some people are given to be single, that is, to be celibate and chaste, but without marriage. It's rare, but it does happen. And those are, they're not alone just because they're not given into marriage. They often are in other kinds of community because they can't be alone. So they'll gather with, like widows gather with widows, right? You'll see that. Even often living together sometimes, right? Or if you can't care for your parents, then you put them in a home, but it's not alone. There's going to be others in that home, right? So they can play bingo together or something in the afternoon, because it's not good to be alone. The person who just clams up shuts the door and never comes out. We even mock that with children, don't we? Not the basement dwellers. That's true too, right? You go into your room, you shut the door, and we never see you again. That's what I think my parents said that to me, actually. I wasn't alone though, because I was interacting through the computer with other people. But that's a difference. That's not probably a good thing either, in its own way, right? This is why we belong to causes and organizations like the Lions Club, that would be one, or community things. We have common culture, value systems, family, faith, especially church, right? So it's something, I don't know who told me this, but it's helpful when you're in, preparing for worship, you pray. Maybe look around and see if anybody's alone, and then move over and sit by them. We don't want to communicate. I mean, maybe they want to be alone because they want to socially distance or something still. But this is a COVID problem. We talked about this a lot with COVID, is the isolation of it. And we tried to break that as best we could with some digital means, but that's still not the same as physical presence. It's true that, I can't think of an example of this. I know I've seen them, like people who haven't been around other people physically, like how shocking it is to just get a hug or something, to have a physical touch. And maybe people have, people who've been abused would be that way, and they repel from physicality. But then when they can finally be embraced, as friends or, in love, then it's it's life-changing, right? Because that isolation is not good. We're not, even physical isolation, which he talks about here too as well, doesn't he? Loneliness hurts because no one can bear life's problems on his own. How many of you have been told you need to work out your problems? Right? Haven't you heard this? This is psychologist says. Well, they're happy to help you, right? Just for a small fee and some drugs. Take some drugs and small fee. Work out your problems. I need to work out my problems. Well, how are you going to do that alone? How can you even understand yourself? Solomon's been talking about this. Paul does too, but Solomon's been talking about this. I don't even understand myself. That's Paul. How would I ever understand myself? I can't. I need somebody else. I need an objective view outside myself to tell me what they see and to help me understand myself. No one can enjoy life's simple pleasures on his own either. That's the second half. So I have all this work, and what's the point if I don't actually have anyone to share it with? All right. So as you see people who are lonely, take them in. But if you're lonely, seek out friends, right? So you could do it both directions. Or if you're working hard and you don't have children to provide for anymore, then look for children to provide for, right? Or look for neighbors or friends, or see what you could do in church, right? And this is Solomon, and this again, as a wise old king, I think he's right. Of course, this has to do with riches, so this is an important statement, echoed a couple times in the book, also Jesus and others. His eye is not satisfied with riches. So this is the deceit of riches. Do you ever have enough? Are you ever actually satisfied? No. Right? And that can be used for good, so that you strive and you work hard and you provide, right? But you can't find satisfaction in the riches themselves alone. So your work can only find value in that it is a benefit to others. This is what he's saying. If you try to find the value in your work in yourself alone, it's always vanity, chasing after the wind, or an evil deed or a grave misfortune even. Right? And that's a vicious cycle too, as I wrote here. Since satisfaction will always remain a distant target, working toward the satisfaction can never end. You're never satisfied. The longer a person works, the harder he works, the more he wallows in his dissatisfaction, especially if you don't get it. And even if you do get it, there's always more. Right? Work winds up pushing satisfaction farther off, not attaining it. The harder you work, isn't it? This, I'm trying to think. There's got to be a metaphor. There's probably a story. Aesop probably has a fable about this, right? It's like pushing, or it's what's his name, pushing the rock up the hill.
What?
Sisyphus, yeah, pushing the rock up the hill, right? And then you seem to get farther, and then you roll all the way back down, right? But the more you strain for it, it seems like the farther away it gets. Oh, that would be like the oasis, right, in the desert. And it's like, oh, it's right there, and you get there. Or trying to get up to the mountain. It's like, it's right there, let's just go to the mountain. It just seems to get farther and farther away the closer you get to it. Have you experienced that? Yeah. All right. The longer a person works, the more he wallows in his dissatisfaction. Work winds up pushing satisfaction farther off, not attaining it. And being alone only heightens the dissatisfaction. For whom am I slaving away anyway? The question demonstrates that even the most adamant atheist needs to be needed at least once in a while. Needs to be needed. What is the point of working only for oneself? Self-sacrifice for self-fulfillment goes nowhere because the two cancel each other out. The only result is growing fatigue, and then this is the key here, theologically, a Sabbath-less existence. So God told you of the potentiality of this when he said on the seventh day, he looked at all he had done, he said it was very good, and he rested from all the work he did. Right? So he's telling you there is a potential that you never stop. But even God stops, and he enjoys the fruits of his labor. Got it? That's one day a week, but that's an important day. All right? Even Jesus rested in the tomb after all the work that he had done, right? And suffering and dying for the sins of the world. So that's always the challenge. And you'll never rest in yourself. I don't know, just this lack of satisfaction. You can see this is all under the sun, under the sun. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. That's true, isn't it? That's like a truism, right? You have somebody to share it with. If they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. So two is better than one. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. That sounds like a marriage text, doesn't it? But how can one be warm alone? Yeah. Although in the summer, it's like, get rid of all the sheets. It's too hot.
You're like, no over there.
Too hot. It's nice in the winter, not so nice in the summer. Yeah. Global warming. So this is actually a happy alternative. He's talking about it, right? This is a happy response to it. Don't be alone, right? And this is, what was I reading? This is true in some cultures. Like, they don't have quite the same, like, marital bed kind of thing. Like people sleep together in the cold because it's like that's how you keep each other warm. And it's not a marriage thing. It's just a practical necessity that you can share in each other's body heat. So there's nothing particularly wrong with that. And your enjoyment of things is amplified when you have someone to share it with. So I think that's true. But you could, even if you're alone, you could live a life of charity and share it with other people that way, right? And then you can still have this kind of enjoyment, like have people over or just be generous that way. All right. Though one can be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. So there's even safety in being with others. This is true for the Christian church. I gave you a nice bit about that there. With the Christian congregation united together, there's strength, or how do I want to say this? Connection is protection. We'll put it that way. Connection is protection. Can you remember that? I don't know. I keep forgetting it, so now I try to remember it all the time. Connection is protection, right? You're not going to be as susceptible to the things under the earth if you're with others who can actually hold you to account, who can help correct, but who can also provide. This is especially, and pray for you, this is especially true for spiritual attack, because you don't often see it, right? You don't recognize what's happening. Others can see it, and they can tell you. So you mentioned this with COVID. Why didn't people know? It's because nobody said, or not enough people were telling them. And still people don't want to believe. That's okay. It takes some time sometimes. But you need somebody who has another perspective, who maybe is skilled or knowledgeable in other areas, because not everybody can be attentive to everything all the time. And you tried to do this? To know everything about everything all the time? Be everywhere all at once? There's only one person who can do that. That's Jesus, right? Who is in all and through all and actually governs all. So let him do that, right? But he also gives you people to provide for you according to their knowledge and wisdom. And everybody's better together than they are apart. And that's what politicians tell us too. But they're not wrong. Of course, they don't care what you think. So then that's not helpful either, right? So, yeah, we have a little bit more we could talk about here, like a page and a half. But yeah, we'll come back to that next time. We'll do the threefold chord maybe next time. Any other notes? Nothing? Okay, we'll let that be. Got a surprise for you in church. You'll see in a minute. Well, you got the flowers. That's a nice surprise.
Oh, is there another surprise?
Yeah, there's another surprise.